Hello everyone, Amy here at School of Motion, and welcome to Lesson 3 of our Cell Animation in Photoshop series. Today we're going to cover the next super important principle of animation, easing. Eases are the key to really bringing your animation to life. Some of you may be familiar with eases from using the Easy Ease button in After Effects. Now we're going to learn how to actually draw an ease frame by frame. Thanks one more time to our friends at Wacom who have saved us from hitting undo a million times when we draw by creating the Sinti. We have a lot of ground to cover in this lesson, so let's get started.
All right, so welcome to part 3 of our frame by frame in Photoshop series here. And today we're going to take a look at something called eases to start out with. Now, some of you may actually be familiar with these from your time in After Effects, but when you're actually drawing them, it's kind of looks a little bit different than what you're used to in, say, the curve editor. So let's take a look at this really quick. And we're going to play this animation back. And if you look, we have these 4 different balls and they're all kind of moving a bit differently, even though all of them are on 2s up here. So why is that? Well, if we take a look at this spacing chart like we had in our lesson for our 1s and 2s demonstration, you can see that each of these has a different sort of spacing on them. So let's take a look at each one individually. Now, this first one up here, this one is going to be called linear spacing. Now, on linear spacing, everything is completely uniform and it just moves at a consistent rate the whole time. Now, this is the kind of spacing that we were using last time with our little sprite guy that was going on that infinity path. So we did change the way that he feels by manipulating the timing, but now we're going to learn how to change the way your animation feels by manipulating the spacing instead. So the next type of ease that we have here is going to be called the easy ease, or slow out and slow in. And this one you might be familiar with from After Effects by hitting that F9 key. So let's take a look at this one. And if you look, it's going slower at the very beginning and the very end, and it's speeding up through this mid part. And that's because the more overlap or the closer together your spacing is going to be, the slower an object is going to appear to be moving. Our next type of spacing that we're going to look at is the ease in. Now, easing in, or sometimes this is called cushioning in, is going to be where you start out really fast and you kind of slow into the motion. And then the inverse of that is going to be the ease out, where it's starting off slow, so it's easing out and going faster at the end. So these are the 4 different kinds of spacing that we're going to use as we're doing our animations. And of course, you can always play with these and, experiment with different kinds of spacing, adding more frames at the end to even ease it in even stronger or manipulate different things. But by adding easing to our animation, we can really bring life into it and give it a more realistic feel and nicer motion than using these linear sort of movements. So now that we have this newfound knowledge of eases, we can move on and do some really cool stuff with it in the next part of our tutorial. In this lesson, we're going to jump into drawing pretty quickly. So let's take a look at a quick tip to get you going.
So it may not be something that you think about all the time, but it's actually very important to warm up when you're drawing. A lot of illustrators out there do this. They'll just do warm-up sketches, and everybody's got their own routine. But here's what mine is. So I'll just go in and I'll just kind of start drawing shapes, and then I just keep adding on to those. And it doesn't have to be anything that really makes sense. It's just something fun to get yourself going. I think the reason that I end up doing round shapes is more because in nature, you're going to see a lot more organic stuff, and it's more interesting and kind of more fun to just get in there and capture all these different organic curves and stuff. And I read, I think it was in the Animator Survival Kit, that animators just seem to like circles and round things. And that probably has more to do with, you're capturing flow and movement when you're doing this stuff. So this is nothing special that I just did here, but this is just my warm-up routine. So try and develop a routine of your own.
Alright, so let's take a look at this artwork. If you have a student account, you'll be able to download this artwork for free to use along with today's lesson. So let's take a quick look at what we've got here. Now, the object of today's lesson is we're going to get this eye to actually blink. And then after we get it blinking, we're going to add a tear falling out of it. So let's take a look at how I set up this file. What I did was I've separated all of these different components out so that I have my line work isolated onto one layer. I have my coloring work on another layer. And then I have this pupil and this little piece of the eye on another layer. And then lastly, the actual iris color is separated out also. Now, the reason that I did this is because when we actually animate this, we really only need to focus on moving just this line work on this layer and then adding the color fill underneath it. There's no need for us to draw this pupil and this iris over and over again if we're just getting an eye to open and close. So let's actually work on getting this eye to open and close now. What we want to do is we'll just isolate this line work so we don't have a lot of distractions kind of behind here. So this is all we're going to be working with right now. And the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to figure out, we're kind of going to work in more of a pose to pose sort of way this time. Now, in the last lesson, we were just going straight ahead, which means that we weren't really planning what our other positions looked like and then we're filling them in. We were just going and just animating, you know, doing that sprite that we were just drawing a frame and then adding a frame and then drawing again and then adding another frame, and we weren't really planning things out. Now with pose to pose, what we're going to be doing is we're going to actually draw a couple of keyframes, which in this case, our first frame, the eye being open, and then another frame with the eye being closed. And then we're going to go back and we're actually going to add more information in between those frames. So we're going to tween them after we set those two keys or extreme positions. So since we already have the first position drawn, let's go ahead and draw that second key position of the eye being closed. First, we want this shortened down to one layer or one frame exposure, and you can do that by dragging this. And we're actually going to be working on ones this time because eye blinks are pretty quick. And we are going to take this line work and we're actually going to go in, and instead of adding a new frame exposure and trying to trace all of this, I want to keep this line work kind of on the outside consistent. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to duplicate this frame. And to make our video layer, we're just going to drop it in like that. So now we have an exact duplicate of our previous line work. So now we can just take our eraser and we can just erase out the parts that we don't want anymore. So I'm going to erase this top line here. And I'm also going to end up erasing this bottom line because this is going to actually rise up to meet this top lid in the middle. Now, the reason I'm doing that is because if we just have this lid kind of closing down, it actually doesn't look quite correct, even though in a technical sense, if you blink and you really observe it, it's only your top eyelid moving. In this cartoon world sense, we want both of these lids moving for our blink. So now we can't really see what our first position looked like, so we're going to just hit our onion skin button, and there it is again, and we can see our original artwork. And let me just clean that up a bit more. All right, and now I'm just going to grab my brush as usual, make sure I have the color that I want selected, and I'm just going to draw this final resting closed position here. So just a couple things to keep in mind when you're drawing this final closed position. You want to remember that eyeballs are kind of curved. So you're going to dip this curve down. You're not going to want to just go straight across like that because it doesn't look correct. The other thing is, if you have to undo like a million times, that's totally okay. Frame by frame animation is really just like anything else. It takes a lot of practice. So the more that you do this stuff, the better you're going to get at it and the faster you're going to get at doing it. All right, now that we've got our first and last frames worked out, we're going to go in and we're going to do something called tweening, or adding in-between frames between these two extreme positions of movement here. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to actually create ourselves a spacing chart once again, like we did in that other lesson with our infinite sprite. So we are going to click somewhere else that's not in there, and we're going to make a new layer, and we're just going to make a spacing layer. And I'm actually going to grab my obnoxious pink color, and we are going to make a chart. So what we're going to do is, since we want these two lids to meet up, we are going to draw our line down here, and this would be our topmost position for that and bottommost position for that. So here's the actual midline, and now we want to work our way out on opposite ends here. And the movement that I want to create on this is I'm actually going to ease into this. So my spacing is going to start off close together, and then it's going to get farther apart as we're going up this way. So that will create the effect of this is going to be slowing down as this eyelid is closing together. Instead of it snapping shut, it's slowing into the shut. So we'll add a frame here and a frame here. We'll add another frame just a wee bit farther apart here, and I'll add one here. And then I'm going to add one that's a lot closer to the top, almost in this midline here, and same thing on the bottom. And this will create a nice ease in to this eye close here. So now I want to actually animate this. What we're going to do is we're going to do that same duplication method that we did before. So we're going to go back here, and we are going to just hit duplicate frame. And that's going to make another copy right in between these two, conveniently. And we're going to erase out that line work that we no longer need. And then we're going to draw in our new line work so that we're going to line it up right here with these next positions. All right, so now that we've got that all drawn out, we can take a look at what's going on here. And it's quick, but you can see we've got our eye closing down now. Actually, it's very quick because we're on ones like this. Really quick, I just kind of went in and I doubled the frame exposure so you guys can actually really feel how that ease works and how it's slowing into this close here. So I'm sure that gives you a little bit better of an idea. Now it's going really slow, 12 frames per second. Oh well. Anyway, moving along now. I'm going to change this back to ones, and then I'm going to go in and clean up a couple of little areas that I'm seeing that I'm not liking, like I have a little bit of a pit there, and a couple other little things. There's a little bit of ick there. So I'll take this time now to just clean that up really quick, and then we'll move on to opening the eye up. All right, so now that we've got that eye closing, we want to do the inverse and actually make it open back up. But we don't want to use the same sort of ease here. We want to do the opposite, where we're going to have it speeding up into the open and then easing into this last bit here. So we're going to actually make a new spacing chart now. So we will turn that one off, and we are going to go in and make our new spacing chart. I'm actually going to line those up at the very beginning, and we're going to call this spacing open. And let's grab our obnoxious pink color, and I'm going to draw my line here, and I know my last position is going to be here. So I'm going to mark, technically this will actually be my first position this time. So I'll mark that out. And now I want to go in and I want this to be somewhere around here. And a little farther up on this guy. And I want two more here, so we'll do one that's a little bit farther out and one there. And same thing up here. This is our end point. Put one there, and we'll put one there. All right, and now we're just going to repeat that same process of drawing these again, only we're going to grab frame 1 here, and this is our end point. So we're actually going to duplicate this one, and we're going to stick it right at the top of the stack, because this is our end goal. So we will start off all the way back here, and we're just going to work our way back to this open position now. Now, one trick that I'll do sometimes is I'll colorize a frame so that it's very obviously different from whatever else I'm working on. And that's just one of those things I do to kind of keep my own sanity when I start zoning out a bit when I'm drawing and getting lost in the line work. I'm one of those people that's just prone to kind of zone into something and then realize, oh, I screwed up. So I try and prevent that as best as I can by using these little tricks like colorize frames. Alright, and again, I'm just going to go back through and kind of clean up these areas that need a little touching up because they have little weird spots and whatnot. Alright, so I'm going to make this, we're going to uncolorize it, and we can turn off our spacing layer, and let's check out what we've got now. So there you go, we have our blinking eye, and it's easing into the close, and it's easing into that open. So, that's looking pretty good. Alright. So now that we've gotten that line work done, we can add some color to this now, because clearly this doesn't look right yet. So to add the color, we're going to again turn off that stuff that we don't need right now. We're just going to need our line work and this color layer. And the first thing we're going to want to do is the same thing we did with the eye line work, where we're going to get this down to a 1 frame exposure just by dragging it. So that's taken care of. And now we can start adding frames. We're not going to be duplicating these ones. We're just going to add a frame and drag it in to make a new video group and name this. And now what we can do is, instead of going through and, picking this color and then hitting the brush tool and trying to fill it in like that, we are actually going to fill this in using an action that we'll set up. Now, first, we'll look at one way you can do this, where you're going to select your magic wand tool, which is W, and then hold Shift to add onto that selection. And if you hit Alt Backspace, you'll notice that this will just fill in, right? So let's deselect it. Well, the problem with this method of doing it is you don't have to do this part that I'm doing right now. This is just an example. You're going to get these weird edges. See this kind of border here in the pixels? That's where it's not quite passing underneath this line work, so it's creating this weird gap. Sometimes it's more noticeable than others, so we want to try and prevent this. Now, the way we can do that is by using an expand fill. Now, this expand fill action is something that I actually got from another artist tutorial, Alex Grigg. He did a wonderful frame by frame in Photoshop tutorial a while ago, and that's actually the one that got me started in doing this. So I totally recommend that you guys check that tutorial out too when you have some time. I will link it in the show notes at the bottom. But moving on now, let's actually set up that action. So I'm going to just kind of get rid of this layer really quick, and I will make my new 1 frame exposure. So we're still going to make that selection first. And then we're going to go up to Window and Actions. And you can see I have a frame by frame folder already set up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new action first. So we will call this Expand Fill. And it's under the frame by frame set. And I'm going to give it a function key. And I'm going to pick F3 here. That's the one that I ended up using. You can use whatever function key you want, and we'll give it a color for fun and hit record. And now what we're going to do is go up to Select, Modify, Expand, and then we'll do 3 pixels. Sometimes you're going to need a little more, sometimes you're going to need a little less. So 3 is kind of a good middle ground for this, and we'll hit OK. So that just expanded our selection, and now we're going to hit Alt and Backspace, and that will fill it with our foreground color. And then you're going to hit Control D, and that will deselect this. Or if you're on a Mac, it would be Command D. And once we've done all that, we can stop recording that action. And now this is all automated, so anytime we hit F3 after we've done a selection, it will go in and just expand it and fill it in for us. So let's just make new frames and do that for the rest of these color layers now. Alright, so now we've got this all colored in, and it was super quick and easy because we automated this using Photoshop actions. So we can close our actions palette down, and can kind of turn everything back on. So let's take a look at where we're at. Now, if you notice, this is going pretty quick right now. So I actually want to make this loop to be a full 1 second. And all we have to do that is just I'll move my range slider and this guy all the way over, and we just need to grab these last layers and just drag them over. So we did that one and we did this one. So it's our line work and our color work. And now when I play this back, you notice it blinks and then it loops back. So we have a nice pause in there. So now that we have this looping, we were going to add like a tear falling out of the eye. So to do that, now we're going to have to think ahead a bit of how do we want this to look. Now, I know that I want my tear to kind of start out over in this section, and I want it to like spread across when we get to this final closing, and I want it to drop while the eye is still closed, or at least start dropping while the eye is still closed. Now, this is set on 1s right now, so this frame right here I know is not going to hold long enough already. So I'm going to extend this middle closed part to be about 6 frames long, because I feel like that's going to be enough of a pause. So to extend this, we're just going to hit increase frame exposure a few times, 5 times to be exact. And that will give us 6 frames. And we'll do the same thing for this one also. Now, I'm actually going to go in and I'm going to rename these right now, just because it helps me keep my sanity, because if you look up here, this is frame 5, but this is saying layer 4. So sometimes it helps if you actually have these so that they correspond with one another when you got a lot of these layers going, especially if you had, for example, you know, a layer that's a line work, and then a layer that's your base color, and then a layer that's your highlight color, and then another layer that's your shadow color. You can see where if you just have, layer 27 and layer 16 and whatever, and then these are kind of unevenly spaced, it might get a little confusing. So that's why I choose to number my frames. So now both frame 5s are actually extended out long enough to where I get a nice pause in here when the eye closes. So it's much more time for us to work with when we're trying to get that tear to fall. So now that we've done that, we kind of have like a rough plan for how this is going to work out as far as timing goes. So let's start drawing this tear, and we're going to do this by starting straight ahead like we did in that previous lesson with the infinite sprite. So we will kind of clean this up a little bit for a second, and we're just going to make a new 1 frame exposure, and let's pick a color that we like. Alright, and I think I'm going to go with that color right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in and I'm going to draw this beginning part of my tear. I just want a little bit of kind of watery stuff over in the side corner. And I'm going to add a new frame exposure, and we'll drop it in. Come here. Sometimes if you're not zoomed in far enough, you'll accidentally grab that edge and drag it out. So you'll have to fix that if you do it. Alright, and now we're going to turn on our onion skins. And we need to draw this next one. Now if you notice, this was a little bit chaotic to look at, so we're going to turn this stuff off. And we're also going to turn down the opacity on this eye line. And to make it even easier on me, I'm going to colorize this to like this green color. See how much more that already stands out? And the last thing I can do is I can go in and mess around with these onion skin settings. and I can change this minimum opacity to something like 30. So now it's really obvious as to which frame I'm on and which frames are the ones that are before or after. So now that I've done that, I can continue drawing, make sure we're on the right layer. And we're just going to add a little bit more each time. And we're going to add another frame here. And we know once we get to this point, this is where we have to worry about that tear kind of welling up and really starting to drip and kind of fall. So we're just going to keep in mind that we only have 2 more frames to really get this built up. And on this frame is where I really want to start to get this to kind of drop down, and it's going to go across a bit like that. And we can scrub back through our work and kind of see how things are looking. And here you can see me kind of scrubbing back and forth between frames. I'm just doing a quick frame check to make sure that everything's looking the way I want it to before I get too far along with this animation and realize that something isn't working out. So definitely take the time every so often and just scrub back and through and make sure everything looks the way you want it to. I'm going to go in and do a little bit of cleanup when I'm done, but I'm just going to keep working on it straight ahead right now. Turn my onion skins back on. And let's draw another one. And I want to really get this tear to start kind of forming up down here, and as it's forming over here, I want to take away from this side. So each time I add more to this bulb area, I want to take a little bit off of that side. And we'll add another frame. And I want to make sure that I have this tear kind of nice and stretched out and about to release right at this last frame here. So we can really keep growing this for another 4 frames, it looks like. Yes, we're going to do another 4 frames. I can count. I'm not a genius, but I at least have that going for me. Now, I actually don't like how much difference there is between this frame and this frame. I like these frames the way that they're drawn, but I'm actually going to come in and I'm going to insert an in-between here. And to do that, I'm just going to select this frame right here, and I'm just going to hit this Create New In-Between button. And that's going to make a blank frame between this frame right here, which is 8, and this frame right here, 9. So I can go into this one now and draw something that's somewhere in between these two. All right, and that just kind of gave your eye just a little bit more information to smooth this transition out to where it's really turning into more of a drop type shape. So let's take a look at where we're at now. Going to move this playback area over. And I'll turn my onion skins off. And it's quick, but I like the way that it's moving. And that's what's important right now. All right, so now that we've gotten to this point to where this tear is kind of hanging on and it's right about to drop off, we need to figure out how quickly we want this to fall. And we're actually going to make another one of those spacing charts like we did before. So we're going to come up to one of these layers outside of our group, and we're going to make a new layer and move it over to the beginning, and we will call this tear spacing. And I'm going to pick my obnoxious pink color that I like. And the way that I want this tear to work is I want it to be slow at the beginning, so it's going to ease out. So it's going to start nice and kind of tight together up here, and then it'll get quicker as it falls because it's going to be gaining speed as it's falling down. So I'm going to pick the bottom of my tear as kind of my reference point. So I'm going to pick my first space right here, and I'm going to make a line that goes down, and then I'm going to figure out how far do I want it falling on each frame. I also need to know how many frames I have left to make this fall. So we just have to do a little bit of simple math. And I'm actually going to, again, renumber these frames so that I can see exactly how many frames I've already used. So you can see I have 10 frames left, so that means that I have 14 frames left in our 24 frames per second. So I'm going to figure out how long do I want this drop to fall. So I think I want to do this over about 10 frames. To do that, we will just start adding some spacing here. So it looks like we're just going to do 8 frames because I like the spacing on that. And that should give the eye enough information. And if it doesn't, we can always come back and kind of tween it again. So let's start drawing this teardrop falling down. All right, I actually moved my tier spacing chart down below all of this other stuff, so it makes it a little bit easier for me to see what I'm drawing. And now I'm going to continue kind of just adding onto this teardrop here. I'm going to just draw this guy in. And I'm going to draw this separated off right here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to focus on getting this tear to fall. And then I'll worry about coming up and doing this part here so that I'm not trying to split my attention between two different things that are going on. I want to focus on just one action right now. So I'm going to just keep adding frames and focusing on getting this tear to fall. Now, as this tear is falling, you can actually give it a little bit of a stretch to it too, and that will help overlap some of these frames a bit more, and it will give it more of a sense of speed, kind of like what we did on that other exercise with the infinity loop, where we stretched that guy out between that midpoint when he was like crossing through the downs and the ups on that X point going here. That's basically the same thing that I'm going to be doing with this teardrop when I'm stretching it out. All right, so let's check out what our teardrop falling looks like now. We're going to turn our onion skins off and just hit play. And there we go. You can see it just kind of looks like it's speeding right off and down. And I might actually want to add just a teeny bit of the tail on this frame. Let's see how that looks. If we just add just a hint of blue to give you a sense that it's gone off into nowhere. And I'm going to turn my spacing chart off now so you can really see what's going on here, and that looks good. Let's see it without that last frame. Yes, I definitely like it better with that last frame because it just gives your eye just that little bit of bonus information so that it knows where that tear went instead of it just being like, oh, did it just, go into oblivion? Sometimes just a teeny bit of extra information really helps out. So now that we've got our tear falling, we want to come back up here and we want to get this kind of little residual bit of like tear liquid to go back to its original position so that we can get that seamless loop again. All right, so we're going to come back to this frame right here, and we are going to go in and turn our onion skins on again, and then just go straight ahead and continue drawing this. And you can go back and look at that first frame, and we know it's just this kind of little line here. So we just want to keep working our way back towards something that looks like that. And we have quite a bit of time to do that in. And just so I get a sense of where I'm going with this, I'm going to copy frame 1. I'm going to drag it up to the top here. And now I'll be able to see when I get closer to this frame exactly what position I need to be in. So I'm actually really darn close right now. So I'm just going to continue going straight ahead here. Now that I'm back at this point, kind of close to like frame 1 here, I've run out of frames. So what I need to do is I need to go in and actually add more frames to this. And the reason I'm doing that and not just letting this sit is because you don't want your animation to fall completely still at this point. Like, we want this to continue having this kind of fluid moving look to it. So let's go in and just add those frames. And we can just do this by doing new one frame exposures. And we don't want to get too crazy with our line work at this point. We can also hit new in between here, and that'll add in the frames and it'll leave your timeline marker like in the right spot instead of advancing this onward. That's the big difference there. So I'm actually going to continue doing this by adding in-betweens. And you wouldn't think that there's a big difference, you know, just in this slight amount of difference in how my lines look, but it's enough to keep it moving. If you look at how that looks, even with the onion skins on, you can see it just gives it a nice little fluidy look to it. So now we've got our full 24 frames per second, and we can turn off our onion skins and we can take a look at this. There we go. And if I don't like the way that this is moving like that quickly towards the end after this tear falls, you can always go back and remove some frames and just change these to 2s, and that will give this a completely different feel to the way that this fluid is moving. So that's always an option, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to number my frames really quick. This 25th frame is really the first frame, so I can get rid of that. And we can go in and turn our line work. We can remove this color overlay. And we can turn our pupil back on and our iris back on. And we can check out our work. So it's always best to kind of just do one more pass over and just check to make sure there's nothing that you know, absolutely don't like. Like I'll go in and clean up a little bit of that brush there and some of this kind of white that's peeking through. Now, when I'm doing this kind of cleanup work, I actually usually leave my onion skins off so that I don't have that distraction of the frame before and the frame after, and I can just focus on the frame that I'm actually working on. And that makes it easier to see all those little spots that are kind of not quite the way that I want them to be. So you don't have to turn your onion skins on when you're doing your cleanup work like this. So I did end up coming in and changing this to 2s after that tear falls off of the screen, because I liked the way that it looked just a little bit better. It was kind of a little bit calmer of a feel than having 1s over there. And so the last thing that I did here was I actually came in and just kind of gave this guy a little bit of like a tail, just to give that animation just a little bit of extra. And because I gave him that tail, I did have to go in and actually change the last couple of frames. I just tweaked them a bit because otherwise it looked like it was sticking at that very last point. So sometimes just adding those little details can change the way that your animation feels and looks also. And you might have to change just a little bit of a couple frames here and there to get the timing to work out again. And adding this tail in last is actually totally okay. We did this deliberately because really when you're working in frame by frame animation or any animation, you kind of want to do things in stages. And adding these little accents last after you get that main body of the animation fleshed out is the way that you want to work on things. That way you don't go in and add all this detail and then realize you have to redraw a ton of stuff. So it's okay that we had to tweak those last couple of frames at the very bottom of the page to make it look a little bit better so that it wasn't sticking, but it was only a couple frame tweak that we had to do because we had that main body fleshed out the way that we wanted it to be before we added these accents.
That's it for lesson 3. We've covered a lot of important foundations in the last 3 lessons. We've gone from baby steps, learning to use Animdescent, to toddling around using timing and spacing. Next up, we'll be doing something much harder and cooler. Make sure you sign up for a free student account so that you can access the project files from this lesson and from other lessons on the site. Coming up, we've got 2 more lessons with very important stuff for you to learn, so I'll see you next time.